Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining husband Pat and myself this morning, and as well our sweet Marin.
Baby Marin's here.
Baby Marin. So if you hear sweet baby noises, it's because there is a sweet baby in my lap, although we may need to cut out for a minute to change a diaper.
She's gentle with us. She does a good job. She understands that Mommy and Daddy are working.
That's right. We'll see how long that lasts.
Mm-hmm. So, good to be back on the Catholic Mama.
The weekly segment now.
I'll probably share this episode on my podcast as well.
Your podcast?
The Patcast. The Pat Flynn Show. We're just waking up. I haven't had my full coffee yet, so we'll get there.
Yeah. It's very confusing waking up when it's dark, and our children have the tendency to wake up in the middle of the night and think it's daytime. So I woke up angry at first because I thought that they had woken up at like 4 a.m. And then lo and behold, I come downstairs and it's almost 7 o'clock.
How about that?
How did I sleep in? Isn't that funny? That's sleeping in.
Oh my goodness. You'll have to excuse me. I have a little something going on with the throat. The Museum of Diseases finally passed something on to me. Better
that than the stomach bug last week that only 2 children had.
Yeah, as far as the things that I could have caught, I'm pretty happy with just this.
Oh, yeah, a little throat tickle?
A little throat tickle.
I made you that drink.
Yes. And look, I have not gone full on man flu yet. So
yet is the key word. Mm-hmm. Our daughter had man flu.
Yeah, Mira gets the man flu.
Very weak.
Reduces to absolute helplessness.
Crying.
Reduces to absolute helplessness.
Crying,
panic.
I mean, it was so ridiculous.
Yeah,
she's not
Daddy's
of a hardy
girl.
Stock. Yeah, Daddy's
She's her
girl.
father's
That's
daughter.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
If real quick, if anybody would like to have a drink similar to the one I made my husband, it's just apple cider vinegar mixed with honey and water and ice.
And for whatever this throat thing I have going on, it really did the trick last night.
So trying again today. I'm sure if you added whiskey to it and warmed it up, it might also
that might be the plan here soon once we get to the proper hour.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about marriage today.
Yes.
Us.
Isn't that sweet?
Our union.
Well, you had a question. Somebody submitted a question to you, correct?
I get this question a lot, but we had I gathered some YouTube comments recently on the podcast, and this was one of the questions of how do you keep your marriage going, but not just your marriage. How do you keep the romance alive with a career, with kids, and how do you argue with your spouse? Not that we've ever done that or had a disagreement on anything before.
No, we are of one mind at all times.
But I get a lot of emails about, and I don't always feel entirely comfortable talking about them, about marriage and children, because I don't feel like I'm an expert in either of these. I mean, when we bring our kids out, we are consistently told by other people how happy and well behaved they are. But they're still young. They could wind up complete degenerates, and
yeah. So far, so good. So we could give some thoughts.
Praying to God that doesn't happen, and we both work really, really hard at making sure we're doing the best we can to raise our kids morally and to show them respect, but also to apply the right amount of discipline. So I think certainly not for a lack of effort, but I don't know.
Effort.
I just, for whatever reason, I just I'll give advice on many different areas, but when people ask me about marriage, and I think we have a very successful marriage, at least now. We can go through some of the history of it, at least after becoming Catholic. For whatever reason, I don't feel as comfortable about it. But here we are. We're going to get through that discomfort together. We're going to talk about it, offer whatever we can.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Marin.
Hi, Marin. So what? Where do you want to start with this?
Well, why don't we just start with us?
Okay.
We've been together how long now? This is a test. Don't mess up. Because I absolutely know.
We've been married for 5 years.
Okay.
And we've been together 8.
Is that right?
Wait. It must be 8. I think it's 8. I think we got together in 2011.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
That is
Yep.
correct. And yes, married 5 years. First, we were married, just to condense history. We can go through it. We were married in the Philadelphia airport in a very quick civil ceremony. This was obviously before we were religious or Catholic. One ceremony out in California, out in wine country, which was a very
fun.
good time, very great time. And then finally, was it 2 years ago now? 3 years ago now? We had our marriage formally blessed in the church.
A year and a half.
Easter
Monday will be 2 years.
And that was very unexpected. You know, we wanted to get our marriage blessed in the church. And we talked to the priest about doing that, and we thought it was just going to be some small little thing that he would do after Mass, and instead he brought us up in the middle. It was daily Mass, but it was a good crowd there for daily Mass. And we essentially had a full marriage ceremony for everybody in daily Mass. So congratulations, you're staying long today, friends. But it was hilarious because, you know, some people were crying in the pews and came up and issued all these people we hadn't even met. We're at our marriage.
My parents and our kids were there, but everybody else was a stranger at that point because we weren't really that active in the church.
And we both agreed as far.
Everybody else was a stranger at that point because we weren't really that active in the church.
And we both agreed, as fun as the California wedding was, that was so much more significant and meaningful. Once we realized the sacramentality of marriage, seeing what this bond is ultimately about and aimed towards, as we're conduits of grace for each other, and this relationship that we have with each other, not just with each other, but also with God, and these binding moral obligations that we now are fully aware of and have undertaken for each other, for our children, that the meaningfulness and significance of that was so much higher that I was almost moved to an emotion.
Yeah, you got a little teary-eyed. I'll never forget it.
I was almost moved for the first time in my life. I was almost moved to an emotion.
Yeah, and you know how many weddings we've been to over the years where it was outside of the church, and I think we've only been to one Catholic wedding together, right? Our friend Monica's, right?
I think so.
Yep. So on to where it just sounds like the profiles for a dating website. Well, they like to watch Netflix together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they love their dogs, and I'm sure they're excited to welcome children. You know, it really, or you know, people are trying to impart a meaning to it that isn't there without the sacramentality.
Or that is there, but
it.
isn't being properly recognized.
Yes,
I think is the better way to say it. Is we all know and experience that there is deep significance in marriage. It's not just some purely social construct. There's something spiritual and holy about this. And if we block out the proper marriage relationship between man, woman, and God, and we try to completely secularize it, well, we still recognize that there's something very special about what's going on, but we can't properly recognize it. We can't really say what it is. So then we have to, you know, talk about Netflix and a shared affection for small furry animals or something like that. But we know that there's something missing there, that there's more to the marriage act, wherever it's being enacted. But if you try to, I don't know, if you try to block it off from what marriage really is, which is
but then people are also, they understand how that it is important and special, so they try to backfill it with other things to try to bring back in what they maybe didn't even know was supposed to be there in the first place. And I would argue most people don't know what a marriage is supposed to be. All I ever heard growing up is marriage is hard. Now, I'm very lucky because my parents have been married over 40 years. Mm-hmm. And I grew up, and I talk about my conversion, how we were a pretty secular family. Religion was something either to be laughed at or ignored. But I grew up in a very loving household, based specifically, I think, whether my parents want to admit it or not, on their Catholic catechesis growing up, and the fact that they were married in the church, and it was their marriage is a sacrament. Mm-hmm. But I grew up in a very loving household with parents who I saw them fight, but they stayed together.
Yep.
And they worked very hard towards raising my brother and myself. So I'm very blessed in that, because I know that it is not typical in today's.
No, it's not. I'm a child of divorced parents, and it's incredibly difficult. That's a subject for another time. But, it's something that, you hear that even if you're older when your parents get divorced, that there's still a trauma or something that happens that you ultimately have to come and reconcile. Because I was going into like high school when my parents were getting divorced, and I was off doing my own thing. I didn't think it really affected me, but it did, especially later in my life. It really did have a very deep and negative impact. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. Why don't we just start by kind of maybe going through what the because I know we try to turn this into a cat. There goes a train that lives behind our house, and we'll just read from the. Okay, there. Is it gone now?
I think that's it.
All right, it's gone. Read from the catechism and make some comments and share some experiences. So, this is from. Do we want to go to the Roman Catechism? I have the JP2 Catechism up.
Whatever makes more sense.
Yeah, Roman Catechism. Now I have to Google with one hand because I'm holding this microphone. And let's see what we get. The Catechism of Trent. The Catechism of the Council of Trent. The nature and meaning of marriage. The nature and meaning of marriage are, therefore, to first be explained. Vice not infrequently assumes the semblance of virtue, and hence care must be taken that the faithful be not deceived by a false appearance of marriage, and thus stain their souls with turpitude and wicked lust. Love the word choices in the Old Catechism. To explain this subject, let us begin with the meaning of the word itself. So, what, again, not infrequently assumes the semblance of virtue. How true that is. There's so many things that people think are virtuous are really vice, just cleverly disguised. We could go through a whole list of things there, but always good to point that out. I actually skipped a paragraph, which was the importance of the instruction of this sacrament. We can go back to that. All right, so names of the sacrament. The word matrimony is derived from the fact that the principal object which a female should propose to herself in marriage is to become a mother, or from the fact that to a mother it belongs to conceive, bring forth, and train her offspring. It is also called wedlock, conjugium, from joining together, because a lawful wife is united to her husband, as it were, by a common yoke. Talk about those yokes. It is also finally called nuptials because, as St. Ambrose observes, the bride veiled her face through modesty, a custom which would also seem to imply that she was to be subject and obedient to her husband. Now that is a contentious claim in these modern days.
Yes, it is.
And we are not afraid to back away from these contentious claims. Is there something to this, or is this a merely outdated and archaic institution? So let's go through this bit by bit, because I think all of these often cause people in our modern era to balk. And the question is, should they balk? Because the first one is saying that marriage is oriented towards being parents.
Which you wouldn't think that. Most people think marriage is about being with one person.
Yes.
And that's it.
It's about us,
yes,
not them looking at marriage. And the Catholic Church is saying, no, that's part of it. But there's a nature of marriage, and the nature of marriage is at least oriented to or disposed to the procreation and the rearing of children. Now, this is common sense, but the modern culture has just abandoned common sense, what we just kind of know through basic indoctrinated people with a bunch of nonsense, I would argue. But we all know that there's something inherent in the nature of marriage that is pointed at the production and rearing of children. Part of that loving sacred bond of man and woman is for their love to combine and result in. We're looking at the product right now.
Such a cute little product,
right? And part of this is like, yeah, that's not only part of the nature of marriage, but it's good for everybody when that happens. And of course, there's circumstances when that just isn't possible for couples, and we can talk about that. And that's not like, if you're having fertility issues or whatever, it doesn't make you any less of a married couple by any means.
Right? And the Catechism will go on to say that.
It does.
A couple paragraphs down, that it doesn't matter if you are not able to have children, you still have a sacramental marriage.
Yep.
But you just be open to life.
That's it. Because there's something in, and this is traditional natural law ethics, that essences are a real feature of the world. And within the essence or nature of things is a certain perfection of it. There's a certain disposition towards which this thing is attempting to attain, that it is good. It causes that nature or essence to truly flourish and be most the kind of thing that it is when that end or range of ends is achieved or being achieved. Aristotle says, for example, a saw is most a saw when it's sawing, is the easiest way to understand something like that. A saw is an artifact, so its sort of purpose is imposed from the outside. But just as the purpose of being a human is a rational animal, we're meant to use our rational faculties to discern what is really good for us and pursue it, which ultimately is eternal friendship with God. Well, same thing. There is a nature and essence of marriage. And the flourishing, the perfection of marriage is exactly what the Catechism is describing. It's a self-sacrificial love of husband and wife to each other. And the Catechism wants to affirm that there's actually a hierarchy there as well, interestingly enough. We'll get to that. But oriented towards the procreation and rearing of children. That is what the marital act essentially is comprised of. And this is, again, why when you separate the marital act from the procreative act, and you start to redefine marriage, and that's when you start to get into all the contemporary
Or you
issues.
separate the procreative act from the marital act.
Yeah, either or, right? It works both directions. So, again, this is a hot topic issue, but all this stuff can be worked out philosophically, theologically. I think we say, no, the Catholic Church is right here. And it's also good for society as well. We know that the family unit is an incredibly stabilizing force. That children have a right. People do have positive rights. Children have a right to their mother and father. Now, sometimes that right isn't always fulfilled, and we have to do the best we can given the circumstances. But we have a binding moral obligation to be there for our children. That every child who comes in this world has a biological mom and there is a binding moral claim that child has to receive care and attention and affection and training and education from their parents. And that if the parents fail to provide that, they are violating the natural moral law. And marriage is that glue, the glue that helps not only stabilize itself on a local level, but also society on a higher level. Once the family bond, the marriage unit breaks down, then the big government has to step in. And it becomes an increasing catastrophe, as we've seen. So there's not only a utilitarian aspect to marriage, but we're not utilitarians as Catholics. There's something fundamentally and intrinsically good about the Marriage Act in and of itself that, when adhered to, when recognized, when properly enacted, has a very good effect on society as well. So there's a lot there in just that first thing. But I mean, so many contemporary, especially political issues, are tied up in this question. So it's really hard. There's a lot there in just that first thing. But I mean, so many contemporary, especially political issues, are tied up in this question. So it's really hard to talk about marriage without raising a lot of points of discussion.
If you want more information or data on anything that Pat was just saying, a book called The Sexual State by Dr. Jennifer Morse Robeck. I can't think of her last name at the moment. She dives a lot into the effects that divorce or having children outside of wedlock and a whole slew of these contemporary issues, what kind of effect they actually have on society.
She's very even-handed. She's a trained economist and social scientist, and she just does a great job of laying out, here's why the marital institution matters for society. Put theological reasons aside, and here's the enormous detrimental effects that have come from the degradation of the family unit, of affirming traditional. Friends, we've been there. We
were cohabitating unmarried millennials who had a baby in 2013, and we have a little sign that somebody gave us as a wedding gift that says the Flynn household was established in 2014. So our 10-month-old son was at our first wedding in California and Philadelphia Airport.
Yeah,
which I should explain. The reason we did the Philadelphia Airport was because we didn't want to do out-of-state paperwork for a marriage license.
Yes,
that's why.
Yep.
If there's any questions why somebody would want to go to the luxurious and exotic location of the Philadelphia International Airport for a wedding, that's why.
Yeah. So the second thing here, marriage should be open to life, at the very least open to life. And this is part of the reason why contraception is immoral, because it's frustrating the essence of the sexual act. And it turns, if there's anything that people should agree with, and here I'm about to go on a rant, so pause me at any time, but it's that you should never treat people as means, but always as ends. And contraception fundamentally just turns people into objects for pleasuring yourself. It turns somebody who should be treated as an ends into a means. It frustrates the sexual act. It confuses the sexual act. And men, be men. We know contraception is not good for women, right? The devastating, systematic hormonal effects, the side effects that this has on women. Men don't let their wives potentially harm themselves just so they can please themselves. That's not a manly thing to do. So there's many reasons, both philosophical and theological. And this is what actually brings many people into Catholic Church, because when the whole world and pretty much all the forms of Christianity were caving to contraception, the Catholic Church stayed absolutely firm. It said, no, you do this, you're going to confuse a lot of stuff. And boy, was the Catholic Church right. A lot of stuff got confused because of contraception. And it's funny to see so many in the secular world coming back around this, and even just from a medical viewpoint saying, like, no, this is like bad. Like, this is really harming women. We'll have to do a whole nother episode on that. But that is part of it, right? Is that the whole act of contraception, chemical contraception, even condoms, the church is right. That's a no-go. Part of marriage is being absolutely open to life. Even if you have fertility issues, right? Again, just the intent there of being open to life is really important. Okay, the next one. It's called wedlock and a joining together, because a lawful wife is united to her husband, as it were, by a common yoke. And a few things I want to say here is part of this common yoke and part of the sacrament of marriage. Sacraments are grace conferring. They're channels or means of receiving grace. That the common yoke for the married couple is not just to get themselves to heaven, but their kids to heaven. That we offer opportunities for each other to grow in holiness, in self-sacrifice. It's often very challenging, these opportunities, right? To give away part of yourself. And listening to a good conversation from a priest the other day is like, you find holiness in your part of life, right? So it would actually be kind of weird for either of us to constantly be going to like holy hour or adoration, because our primary means of receiving grace should be from what our local, proximate moral obligations are, which are to each other and our children. That it's through our marriage and through relationship to our children that God wants to give us the grace to become holy and saints. And actually be very selfish of me if every night when you're taking care of the kids or whatever, I'm like, oh, Christy, I'm going to go to church, and, good luck with that. Like, there's something wrong with that. So anyway, there's some initial thoughts, but why don't you chime in here? I've been gabbing. Yeah. You're sitting here over here just snuggling and sniffing your baby. You should see.
Her hair is so funny. In just 2 years, I forgot how sweet little babies are. We have all of our kids are no more than like 2 years and 3 months apart, but it feels like I haven't held a baby in ages. Oh, she's so nice. Anyway, I know we're going to get more to it on the next one. Well, so with all the three parts that, marriage is oriented towards motherhood or fatherhood, that we're placed under a common yoke, and that the woman is should be obedient to her husband. Mm-hmm. All of these things a few years ago would have made me bristle. Mm-hmm. But I will say that, and then of course, I probably would have, if somebody had said this to me, I would have said, oh, well, you're just confused and under the spell of a patriarchal religion. You're just brainwashed. That's probably what I would have thought. I'm not sure if I would have said that, but I certainly would have been thinking it. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing is that it feels like the contemporary society and expectations for women had created a veil that was laid over me. Or maybe a film, kind of some nasty slime, kind of overlaid on all my actual desires. I wanted to, if I was ever going to be married, I wanted to be a mother, and I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Even though despite I wanted to travel the world first, but no man was ever going to have authority over me. There was just a lot of confusion. Mm-hmm. There's things that I wanted deep down, but then there were also expectations and things that I almost felt guilty that I shouldn't want those things. I shouldn't want to just be a stay-at-home mom. Mm-hmm. I needed to get a $40,000 degree and use it, and then fight with my husband all the time. Whenever he tried to, I used to think, oh, it's going to take some man to tame me. I used to think that sort of thing. But I will say that the freedom that has come in acknowledging these desires that I had always had but suppressed mm-hmm. is amazing. Yeah. And I would never have thought that I would have been agreeing to be obedient to a man. That one especially is something I still kind of chuckle that I've actually agreed to that, and willingly. It's made a huge difference. But you can go ahead and say something before I keep going.
Yeah, well, you say freedom, and that's the true definition of freedom. Freedom is in the Christian context. Freedom really means the freedom to do what you should, or the freedom to do what you ought, and to willfully seek your own good and perfection in understanding of what your good and perfection is. So freedom for excellence, rather than just complete autonomous self-direction, is what we are after. That we have essences, and there are ends, especially the ultimate end of the beatific vision in relationship with God, that are objectively final for us. This is what we are oriented toward and pointed at by the types of things that we are. And so ultimately we have to decide, are we going to flourish as the types of things that we are and pursue these ends through the proper means, or are we not?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that there is, I am free to, in an argument with you, Pat, to call you a bad name and throw something at the wall.
Yeah.
But I'm also free to take some breaths, ask the Holy Spirit for help in making sure that I'm presenting my side of the case.
Yes.
In the best possible way, and then also praying that I can accept your feelings and thoughts as well. And we can all agree that there's one that is better than the other.
And not only that, but I think because just the words obedient and subject to, the problem is the reason they cause so much alarm is they're taken out of the greater overall moral and Christian context which they are in. So just to go through the catechism, right? Never forget that next to God they are to love their husbands, to esteem them above all others, yielding to them, and here's the thing, in all things not inconsistent with Christian piety. And that's the key principle. Like, I don't have a moral obligation to demand things of you that are immoral or against, that is bad for me. So there's bounds here, and that the husband has so with every right, there should be, or often very much is, a correlative duty. So it is the duty of the husband, as affirmed in the catechism right here, to treat his wife generously and honorably. That I have a duty to make sure that I'm helping you get to heaven, and that the things I am asking of you in relationship in our relationship, but in relationship to our children, are in the context of your perfection and your flourishing and the flourishing of our children and the flourishing of our marriage. So there has to be, in order to really have this hierarchical claim, I have to be most fundamentally a servant. And that's how this relationship is work. It's not some tyrannical, oppressive dictator at the head of the household. The father is the loving servant to his family. And at times he does have to make certain demands of saying this is the way that things are going to be done. And look, every relationship needs that. At some point, a tiebreaker has to occur, right? The buck has to stop somewhere. That's why even in the Catholic Church, we have the Pope. It's not just a committee. But if things get contentious enough, we have to have some ultimate point where, okay, the final call is being made. Who gets to make that final call? And the world is hierarchical. It's hierarchical in orders of being. Man has a higher ontological status than a cow, for example, right? The nature of the world is the way that God made it, hierarchical. That's why we talk about kingdom so much in Christianity. And that's not a bad thing. As long as everybody fulfills their moral obligations, so much goodness and flourishing comes out of that. So the perspective that needs to happen is you have to be shifted. It's not just that whatever daddy says goes. It's that husbands have a moral obligation, a binding moral obligation to get their wives to heaven, to treat them generously and honorably. I have to respect you.
Yeah, which when you talk about obedience in marriage, the mainstream society will neglect to mention the duties of the husband.
Yes.
It only falls like, oh, well, look at what the church says that wives have to do. So if you hear hiccuping, that's the baby.
Yeah.
And I got to say, the obedience thing is something I struggled with the most, I think, throughout this whole conversion process. But now that I trust that you understand your duties as a husband, I am it's so much easier for me to defer to you. And it's still hard, and I still have to catch myself because I want to be bullish and obstinate. But now that I trust you and that you are thinking of the greater good of myself and the children fully, but now that I trust you and that you are thinking of the greater good of myself and the children fully, then it's so much easier for me to defer to you. And
it's not that I'm always correct, but it's that I have an obligation to at least try to be correct and moral. So again, in the catechism, the part of the father is to correct the morals of the family, specifically children as they're growing, and to see that we all faithfully discharge our duties in the family. And that's not just myself, right? It starts with me. If I'm not faithfully discharging my duties in everything that I owe to my wife and my children, I can't demand or expect that of anybody else. So it starts with that servant leadership, and then making sure that everybody else is fulfilling their duties, that you are caring for the children and properly catechizing the children and teaching them alongside me as well, that we're meeting our spiritual obligations, that we're going to church, mass, which I don't even have to do generously and honorably, is respecting your input, respecting your opinions. So there is this connection here, and it's a unity, right? It's the both and of the duties of the husband and the wife that causes a deeper, holier, more loving relationship. It grounds greater stability, and it pours out love to the children too. So you have to understand, in the same sense of obedience, understanding that obedience to God causes flourishing. When done right in the family relationship, the hierarchy of the family order causes flourishing as well. Now, the risk there is that I'm not omnipotent, I'm not omniscient, I'm not God. So I can and often do mess up. So dads, husbands, you have a duty to absolutely do your best to not only understand the faith, but live the faith as that serve thing else. So it's a tough thing to do in a modern context because so many flags go up. But I think if you just patiently read the catechism and where the church is coming from, you will see, oh, there's not only a lot of good here, but there seems to be something correct about this.
Yeah. Well, and yes, also read it with your spouse. Mm-hmm. Because I had a very difficult time with the thought that I was somehow going to be taken advantage. If I was obedient to you and you didn't fully understand your role, then somehow I am being taken advantage of and not respected enough. Mm-hmm. Now, those feelings went away once I also prayed more and dove into the catechism more and started really believing and trusting in God, that he's not going to lead me into a situation where I'm going to get trampled on.
And not only that, but to that point, say that happened, right? Say that I was like, oh, Christine, you're my wife now. You have to do everything I say, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a total bastard. And I'm just like, okay, all right. But the joke's ultimately on me. Because you're fulfilling your moral obligation. You're growing in holiness. You're going to heaven. Even though you're being mistreated, I'm sending myself to hell by doing that. Yeah. Ultimately, I'm breaking the moral code. So even though it might seem like and this is why we say the moral law is inviolable. I can physically violate it. I can choose to go against it, but I can't do it without incurring moral guilt, shifting the disposition of my soul away from God, away from holiness, and away from love. So even if I try to do that, I can't win. I don't win.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
You would actually be winning because you're like, okay, blah, blah,
this is still a marriage. I'm
committed. Yep. I'm fulfilling. So you're growing in holiness, even though you're being mistreated.
Yeah. So I was going to say,
if that isn't the life of so many saints, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of female saints were not treated well by their husbands, and yet we don't remember their husbands' names, but we sure remember the wives.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's so important to realize is
the wives.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's so important to realize is you can't cheat God. You can't cheat the moral law.
So even if
you might suffer under it sometimes, but you're ultimately, yeah.
So even if you are the only person in the marriage who is true to the Catholic faith, either your spouse is not Catholic or does not hold the sacramental view of marriage, you follow it. Mm-hmm. And you never know. If you follow it, if this is not something that you've been doing previously and your behavior and disposition change over time, then your spouse may be more willing to hold up their end of the bargain as well. And it is a very difficult thing. I understand that. Trust me. Mm-hmm. But it is absolutely doable. And pray.
Yeah.
Pray, and follow your duties, because you need to get yourself to heaven. And also, a lot of times, I mean, how many times have you heard Catholics should live with joy? Mm-hmm. And you should live so joyfully that people looking at you from the outside ask what it is about faith. Mm-hmm. So try to do that in your own marriage, in your own home, and great things might come.
That our baby is really hiccupy.
Yes, she is.
Do we want to keep going here, or do we want to take a short little break and...
We could do a part two.
All right. Yes, because there's so much more to talk about here, and I feel like the problem with this is when we talk about marriage, we have to spend so much time kind of battling modern culture and clarifying terms and defending the traditional view that we don't often get to explore as much all the beauty of it. And I think that's a shame. So I would like to continue, because we haven't talked about how Christ elevated the sacrament.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's so much more here. The unity of marriage, the indissolubility. So yeah, why don't we just make this a
real quick, because we did promise that we'd talk about this. Do you want to give like one small piece of advice on how to fight with your spouse?
Oh,
I have one. If I can start.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, and then we'll say goodbye for this episode for now. I am a very argumentative person. I hate being wrong. I am stubborn, and the only thing that has helped over time, besides I actually pray daily for my abilities as a wife and mother, specifically wife first and then a mother. I pray that my heart stays soft and softened towards my husband, does not harden. And I also pray that I ask for Mary to lend me her spirit and her obedience and to the will of God. And what God has willed for me is to be a good wife. But in the actual moment of the argument, I do say a quick prayer, not that Pat changes his mind and does what I want, but that I can better understand where he's coming from.
The first thing I would say is that, our marriage was pretty rocky at times before we became Catholic. And, ironically, even though we would have maybe laughed at everything we just read, living that life has not only saved our marriage, but solidified it, heightened it. And, I love you now more than ever, honestly. And she doesn't have the microphone, so she can't gush over that.
That's sweet.
And so, just living the faith more than anything else and getting so secure on because there's very few things that we honestly disagree about. And when we do bicker or fight, it's usually over something silly. We're just very tired from the kids.
Yeah.
There's no major things in life that we
but
are at a fundamental...
Used to be.
Yes.
There used to be things that we did not, the values were not the same.
Yeah.
Our hierarchy of what we cared about did not line up.
And that's true. And I think that's a big part of it is like we just fundamentally are on the same page about at least the biggest things in life now, that points of major contention just aren't even a viable option. The other thing I would say is confession. Having that, at least a monthly confession, that examination of conscience, realizing where am I failing as a father, or where can I at least step it up? Where am I treat my wife as generously or as honorably as I can, but my children as well? Am I being patient enough? Am I being understanding enough? Has really helped me. And it's more about, I would say, not just fighting with your wife, but finding opportunities not to start the fight has been really big for me. Not saying things when you want to say things.
Can I quick tell my story?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the other night we were in the van driving around with the kids, and it was dark. And I don't know, Pat, you said something that, it just got under my skin so fast. And all of these insults collided in my head at the same time that nothing came out. I was actually speechless.
It's like the venereal diseases of Mr. Burns. They just all canceled each other out. Yeah.
That's right. So I couldn't say anything, and I just started laughing, and I said, that must, I thank the Holy Spirit for making that happen. And I'm glad that it was dark, because if you had seen me laughing, you would have asked what I was laughing about, and I'm sure an insult would have popped up at that point.
And that's certainly before all this trying to really live the sacrament. If something came into my mind, I would just blurt it out. I don't care how insensitive it was.
It's a very selfish desire, and it's so hard to curtail that sometimes. But once you understand that it's not just about you, you can let those things go a little bit better.
And so that would be my big thing. Avail yourself with the sacrament of confession, because those examinations of conscience are so healing and build so much awareness, and working with the priest through this. And it is a grace. It's God working in you. So just allowing God to work in you, I feel that where I have gotten better so much in our marriage is it's not through my own effort. It's opening myself up to receive grace through all the sacraments, not just our marriage, but especially confession, and the sacraments working together in the life of the church.
Right. It's your fiat.
Yeah.
It's a constant daily fiat. I will say real quick, too, about when you brought up confession. If you Google, examination of conscience, Catholic, and you brought up confession. If you Google, examination of conscience, Catholic, you will come up with a big list and it'll go through all of the commandments, and they might not all apply to you. So I would suggest, as a married person, Google Catholic examination of conscience for married couples, and it will have some really good questions about what have you done lately. And there's been a few like, ooh, I did do that. I didn't even think about that. You know, speaking uncharitably in an uncharitable tone, being sarcastic to your kids when you're frustrated with them, like, ooh, guilty. Yeah. So I had some extra things to go into confession with that I didn't even realize were a problem. But since confessing them and bringing awareness to them, I feel like I've improved.
Speaking of, confession today.
3 p.m. I know.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course.
Fun. We'll continue this because there's so much here.
We're going to have to. Yeah. All right. Until next time, everyone.
Don'tMama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy-to-understand grown-up answers, the pared-down but not talked-down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.